My family thought I was an unwanted burden they could finally cut loose. They showed me fake papers, threw me out of the house I'd spent years helping build, and stole everything I'd worked for. What they didn't know was that 3 months earlier, I'd quietly run a DNA test on every single person in that house, and what it revealed was about to tear their entire world apart. Before I continue, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you've ever been made to feel like you didn't really belong in your own family, hit like and subscribe. This one's for you. I'm Vanessa Cole. I grew up believing I was the black sheep of the Cole family, the daughter who never quite fit, who worked twice as hard for half the credit, while my two siblings, Grant and Paisley, got everything handed to them without asking. It started small. My father, Walter, always introduced me differently at gatherings. And this is Vanessa. A half-beat pause I felt more than heard, compared to the easy warmth he gave Grant and Paisley's names. My mother, Denise, kept a photo wall in the hallway that somehow never had a single baby picture of me on it. I used to tell myself I was imagining it. Families are messy. Not every slight means something. Then, 3 years ago, my father had a stroke. I moved back home to help manage his care, and somewhere in that chaos, I also quietly took over managing the family's small property portfolio, 3 rental units my parents had built up over decades. I handled the tenants, the taxes, the repairs, the late-night emergency calls when a pipe burst. Grant showed up twice. Paisley showed up for photos. I told myself it didn't matter who showed up. I told myself I was doing it out of love, not for credit. Then, this past spring, at what was supposed to be a simple family dinner to discuss my father's estate planning, my mother slid a folder across the table. Inside were legal documents, a trust structure that named Grant and Paisley as the sole beneficiaries of the properties I'd spent 3 years managing. My name wasn't on a single page. "You were never actually part of this," Denise said, not even looking up from her plate. "Your father and I always meant to tell you eventually. You're not, biologically, ours." The room went quiet in that specific way rooms go quiet right before something breaks. I sat there, holding a fork I couldn't remember picking up, staring at people who'd let me believe I belonged to them for 29 years, only to erase me the moment it became financially convenient. Grant didn't even try to hide his smile. "So, maybe it's time you actually moved out," he said. "This was never really your family to begin with." I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just nodded, gathered my things, and left. What none of them knew was that 3 months earlier, after years of small, nagging inconsistencies I could never quite explain, I'd quietly sent DNA samples from everyone in that house to a lab, including my own. The results had been sitting in my email for weeks. I hadn't told a single soul. I was about to. I moved into a cheap, short-term rental across town, the kind of place with thin walls and a mattress that dipped in the middle. And for the first 2 nights, I barely slept. Not from grief exactly, from the strange, disorienting work of rewriting 29 years of memory in real time. Every birthday, every holiday photo, every time I'd told myself I was imagining the distance. I didn't reach for the DNA results right away. I'd learned that in forensic work, the kind of quiet, meticulous digging I used to do professionally before I stepped back to care for my father, you don't act on information the moment you have it. You verify it. You build the full picture before you ever show your hand. So instead of confronting anyone, I did what I'd always done best. I got quiet and I got thorough. I pulled the property management files I'd kept for 3 years, every repair invoice, every tenant lease, every tax filing I'd personally handled while Grant and Paisley were, as far as I could tell, mostly absent. I cross-referenced them against the new trust documents my mother had shown me at dinner. And that's when the second inconsistency surfaced. The trust hadn't just excluded me. It had been amended 8 months earlier, quietly, without my father's updated signature on file anywhere I could find, right around the time his stroke had left him struggling to read fine print without help. I sat with that for a long moment. My father hadn't willingly written me out. Someone had done it around him while he was vulnerable, and let me believe it was his decision. Before I tell you what happened next, if this story is hitting a nerve, drop a comment and tell me, has anyone ever tried to rewrite your place in your own family? I opened the DNA results. I'd expected, honestly, to find nothing. Some confirmation that I really was unrelated. A clean, simple explanation for a lifetime of feeling like an outsider in my own home. What I found instead reshaped the entire story. I was, biologically, my father's daughter. Full match, no ambiguity. Grant wasn't. The report showed zero genetic overlap between Grant and my father. None. Whatever explanation existed for that, it wasn't the one I'd grown up believing, and it definitely wasn't the one Grant or my mother had been counting on staying buried. I sat in that thin-walled apartment at 1 a.m., laptop open, staring at a result that didn't just change my story, it detonated theirs. My mother had spent 29 years building a family narrative that quietly, systematically, positioned me as the outsider, while sitting on a secret that would have made her the one with something to actually hide. I thought about confronting her immediately. I didn't. I'd learned enough by then to know that walking in with raw anger gets you dismissed as emotional and unreliable. Walking in with documentation gets you believed. So I waited. I gathered the property records, the amended trust paperwork with its suspicious timing, and the lab results into one organized file. And I found out, through my aunt, that my parents were holding a formal family meeting the following week, lawyers present, to finalize the new trust and, as Paisley had apparently told relatives, sort out Vanessa's situation properly. They were going to make it official. Cut me out on paper, in front of witnesses, with legal permanence. I RSVP'd that I'd be there. The meeting was held in my parents' dining room, the same table where my mother had first told me I wasn't really theirs. This time, a family attorney sat at the head of it, papers spread out, ready to formalize everything. Grant arrived in a new watch he definitely couldn't have afforded on his own salary. Paisley sat beside my mother, already glancing at me with the practiced pity people give someone they've decided has already lost. My father sat quietly at the end of the table, a little slower since the stroke, watching everything with the confused, careful attention of a man who wasn't entirely sure what was happening in his own home anymore. My mother began exactly the way I expected, repeating the story from dinner, softened for an audience now, framing it as a long overdue correction rather than the ambush it actually was. "We should have told her sooner," she said, folding her hands. "But family isn't always about blood. We raised you. That should count for something." "It should," I said, "which is an interesting thing for you to say, considering blood is exactly what this is about." I opened my folder and set 3 things on the table, one at a time. The first was the amended trust, with its quietly convenient timing 8 months earlier, right when my father's ability to carefully review legal paperwork had been compromised. The second was 3 years of property management records, invoices, and tax filings, all bearing my name, documenting exactly who had actually been running the family's assets while Grant and Paisley were, by their own text messages to relatives, too busy. The third was the lab report. I looked directly at my mother. "You told me I wasn't biologically yours. You were right that someone at this table isn't." I turned the report so everyone could see it. "It's not me." The room went the same specific kind of silent it had gone the night I was thrown out, except this time, it wasn't me sitting frozen. Grant's face changed first, that particular color drain that happens when a lie you've built a life on top of finally meets its evidence. My mother reached for the paper with visibly shaking hands, scanning it once, twice, like the numbers might rearrange themselves if she looked hard enough. My father broke the silence. Slowly, carefully, in the halting voice he'd had since the stroke, he asked my mother one question. "Denise, who is his father?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. 29 years of carefully maintained family mythology collapsed into that one unanswered question, in front of the family attorney, in front of Paisley, in front of me. The attorney, to his credit, didn't miss a beat. He quietly informed the room that given the newly disclosed information, the amended trust, signed without my father's properly witnessed consent, benefiting a beneficiary now confirmed to have no biological claim to the estate under the family's own stated terms, was almost certainly going to be challenged and very likely voided entirely. Grant tried to argue that biology didn't matter, that he'd been raised as a Cole, that none of this changed anything. It was, I noticed, almost exactly what my mother had said to me at that same table months earlier, except this time it didn't land the same way, because this time there was a signed, notarized report sitting between the excuse and the truth. My father asked for the original trust to be restored, the one that had existed before the quiet amendment, before anyone thought a stroke made him an easy signature to work around. He asked, specifically, that the properties I'd spent 3 years actually managing be placed under my name, in recognition of work no one else in that family had ever bothered to show up for. Grant left the meeting first, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. My mother stayed at the table long after everyone else had gone, staring at a lab report she couldn't argue with, finally out of narratives to rewrite. 6 months later, I own the 3 properties outright. I still visit my father every Sunday, the version of family I have left that was never actually built on a lie. Grant and my mother speak to me occasionally now, carefully, the way people talk to someone who holds proof they can't dispute. They spent 29 years telling me I didn't really belong in that family. It turns out, all along, the one thing I never had to prove was that I did. If you've ever had to prove your place in your own family, or fight for something that was rightfully yours, let me know in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story moved you, hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it today.